They won't let me out, Nicholas. They never do.
Something that has helped me incredibly in my life.
Yeah.
And Scientologist for over 30 years. I wouldn't be where I am.
Yeah.
As a friend of Nicole Kidman, I got to know Tom Cruise quite well.
Yeah.
You know, $2.50 on sale, special video on Scientology.
They were not just two of Hollywood's most powerful stars. They were symbols of everything larger than life about the movie business. Tom Cruise, the unstoppable daredevil who risked his own life to make audiences believe in the impossible. Russell Crowe, the fierce warrior whose raw performances could silence an entire theater. On paper, their paths crossing should have been a dream, but behind closed doors, their friendship twisted into rivalry, betrayal, and explosive tension that followed them for decades. And when Russell Crowe finally broke his silence, what he revealed about Tom Cruise was not just shocking. It exposed the side of Hollywood no one wanted to talk about. Tom Cruise did not just become a movie star, he became the definition of one. In the mid-1980s, when Hollywood was packed with rising talents, Cruise shot straight to the top with Top Gun. As Pete Maverick Mitchell, he was not just a character, he was a cultural moment. The film earned over $350 million on a modest budget, but its real impact could not be measured in ticket sales. Suddenly, young men were joining the Navy because of Maverick, and sales of Ray-Ban aviators exploded by nearly 40%. Cruise was no longer just acting in films, he was shaping pop culture itself, and that was only the beginning. 10 years later, he was not just starring in blockbusters, he was producing them. With Mission Impossible in 1996, Cruise did not just take on the role of Ethan Hunt. He took control. He made a decision few actors dared to make. He would do the dangerous stunts himself. Where most stars relied on doubles, Cruise dangled off cliffs, clung to airplanes, and even held his breath underwater for over 6 minutes to get the shot. By refusing to fake it, he turned his films into real-life spectacles. Each Mission Impossible became bigger than the last, with the franchise eventually crossing $3.5 billion worldwide. Decades later, Cruise was still topping the box office in his 60s, with audiences showing up just to see how far he would push himself next. But this obsession with control and perfection did not stop at stunts. Cruise's contracts gave him unprecedented power over his productions. He could approve scripts, bring in his own writers, oversee editing, and reshape films around himself. For some directors, this was a dream. They had a star who could guarantee global success. For others, it was a nightmare. Cruise was not just an actor, he was a one-man studio, and not everyone could handle that intensity. Even in dramas like A Few Good Men or Jerry Maguire, he proved he had real acting chops, earning Oscar nominations and Golden Globes. Yet the image that stuck was the one he carefully built, the fearless, unstoppable, untouchable Tom Cruise. For years, Hollywood treated him like its crown jewel. More than 30 of his films passed the $100 million mark, a record most actors could only dream of. And while critics sometimes debated his range, audiences never seemed to care. Cruise had mastered the art of being more than just a star. He became a brand built on speed, intensity, and absolute control. But as powerful as that made him, it also created enemies. Co-stars, directors, and even friends began to see another side of Cruise, the relentless perfectionist who demanded the spotlight at any cost. And when he finally crossed paths with Russell Crowe, the results were not just explosive on screen, they were explosive off it too. While Tom Cruise was cementing himself as Hollywood's most bankable daredevil, Russell Crowe was carving out a reputation of a very different kind. Born in New Zealand and raised in Australia, Crowe did not rely on stunts or flash. He relied on raw, uncompromising intensity. His breakout role came in Romper Stomper in 1992, where he played a violent neo-Nazi leader with such terrifying conviction that audiences compared him to Malcolm McDowell in A Clockwork Orange. The performance made him a star overnight in Australia, but it also set the tone for the kind of actor he would become: fearless, uncompromising, and unafraid to completely disappear into a role. 2 years later, he shocked everyone by doing the exact opposite. In The Sum of Us, Crowe played a tender, vulnerable gay plumber in a heartfelt family drama. The contrast could not have been more striking. Critics quickly realized Crowe was not just a rising star, he was a chameleon. Hollywood took notice. By the late 1990s, he was headlining major studio films and delivering performances that critics could not ignore. From The Insider, where he gained over 30 pounds to play whistleblower Jeffrey Wigand, to Gladiator and A Beautiful Mind, Crowe became the face of serious transformative acting. What Cruise built through spectacle, Crowe built through intensity. In 2000, he became Maximus in Gladiator, a role so iconic it won him an Oscar and turned him into a global phenomenon. The next year, he starred in A Beautiful Mind, earning yet another Oscar nomination and cementing his reputation as one of the greatest actors of his generation. He was not just starring in hit films, he was starring in films that won Best Picture back-to-back. For an actor, that was the ultimate validation. Unlike Cruise, who dominated through box office numbers and franchises, Crowe dominated through prestige. But Russell Crowe was not just about the big screen. He dabbled in music, fronting bands like 30-Odd Foot of Grunts, and later the Gentlemen Barbers. In Australia, he even directed his own film, The Water Diviner, which won awards at home and showed he could command a project from behind the camera too. Crowe had range, and he had credibility. He was respected in a way that made him almost untouchable, an artist who put craft above everything else. And that is where the contrast with Cruise became impossible to ignore. Cruise represented the studio machine, blockbuster power, global marketing, high-octane action. Crowe represented the artist, gritty transformations, character studies, and award-season dominance. In Hollywood, both paths could lead to greatness. But when the two men finally crossed paths, those differences did not complement each other. They collided, and the first time they met, Nicole Kidman was right in the middle of it. Hollywood is full of staged introductions, but the first meeting between Tom Cruise and Russell Crowe was anything but ordinary. It happened in the summer of 1992 at a casual barbecue in Sydney, Australia, an unlikely setting for two men who would eventually headline some of the biggest blockbusters of their time. The host was actress Naomi Watts, and among the small circle of guests was Nicole Kidman, then married to Cruise and already a rising star herself. Kidman was not just another guest that night. She was the bridge between the two men. She had been following Crowe's work in Australian films, especially Romper Stomper and Proof, and she made it her mission to connect him with her husband. When Kidman personally walked Cruise over and introduced him to Crowe, it was clear she was not winging it. She had already been praising Crowe to Cruise behind the scenes, even showing him some of his films. It was as if she believed Crowe was destined for something bigger, and she wanted Cruise to recognize it. To Crowe's surprise, Cruise was not dismissive or distracted. Despite being one of the most famous men in the world at the time, Cruise had actually taken the time to watch Crowe's films and came prepared with thoughtful questions about his acting process and his life in Australian cinema. For a young actor still breaking into Hollywood, it was surreal. One of the industry's biggest stars not only knew who he was, but was genuinely curious about him. The conversation went on for hours. They discussed film, performance, and even touched on subjects most Hollywood stars would carefully avoid. At one point, Crowe brought up Scientology. He later recalled spotting a pricey Scientology video at a rental store. Out of curiosity, and maybe out of respect for Kidman's connection to Cruise, he had checked it out. When he mentioned it to Cruise, he was not sure what kind of reaction he would get. Scientology was already a controversial subject, and Cruise was its most famous believer. But instead of pushing back or trying to convert him, Cruise responded with a laid-back attitude that surprised Crowe. He simply said, "If it is important to you, man, you will do something about it." To Crowe, this was a defining moment. It showed a side of Cruise that felt grounded, easygoing, and even cool. For a while, it seemed like the beginning of a genuine friendship. Cruise was already a global icon. Kidman was on her way to becoming one, and Crowe was the rising talent everyone in Australia knew was about to break through. On the surface, it was the kind of connection that could have led to years of collaboration. But Hollywood friendships are fragile, and when Cruise and Kidman's marriage began to unravel, the relationship between Cruise and Crowe would change forever. By the early 2000s, Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman were no longer Hollywood's golden couple. Their divorce in 2001 sent shockwaves through the industry, not just because of who they were, but because of how sudden and bitter it seemed. For a decade, they had been the ultimate power pair, red carpet royalty who seemed untouchable. But behind the scenes, their marriage was under heavy strain. When Cruise filed for divorce citing irreconcilable differences, Kidman was reportedly blindsided, and caught in the middle of it all was Russell Crowe. For nearly a decade, Crowe had maintained friendships with both Cruise and Kidman, But when the split happened, he faced an impossible choice. Cruise's team allegedly pressured him to step back from Kidman, warning him not to get too close. In Hollywood, where alliances can make or break careers, that kind of pressure carried weight. But Crowe did not budge. Instead, he stood firmly by Kidman. He had grown close to her family, seen her vulnerabilities, and felt protective of her at a time when the world was watching her most painful chapter unfold. For Crowe, this was not about politics, it was about loyalty. But loyalty came at a price. Cruise, who valued control and absolute loyalty in his inner circle, did not take kindly to Crowe's decision. A rift began to form, and though it was not played out publicly, people inside the industry noticed. Then Crowe made things worse. During a press event, he made a joke that he had become part of Nicole's settlement package. He meant it as a light-hearted comment, a way of showing affection for Kidman during a difficult time. But in Hollywood, words spread fast. To Cruise, it did not come off as harmless. It came off as betrayal. From that point on, any warmth between the two men seemed to vanish. Their paths did not cross often, but when they did, the tension was undeniable. Crowe, known for his blunt personality, was not about to bow down to Cruise's authority, and Cruise, used to being the most powerful presence in any room, was not about to forget a slight. The two men who once shared hours-long conversations about acting and life now stood on opposite sides of a Hollywood divide. For years, their strained relationship remained mostly in the shadows, whispered about in industry circles but rarely addressed directly. Still, the bitterness lingered. And when fate finally brought them back together on a movie set more than a decade later, all that unresolved tension came roaring back to the surface. For years, the tension between Tom Cruise and Russell Crowe stayed under the radar, unspoken but undeniable. That all changed in 2017, when Universal Pictures launched an ambitious plan to create a new shared monster universe. The film meant to kick it off was The Mummy, and for the first time, Cruise and Crowe would share the screen. On paper, it sounded like a dream pairing, two Academy Award-winning talents with global box office pull. But on set, it was a different story. The film featured a brutal fight scene between their characters that was meant to symbolize raw power colliding. What nobody expected was how much that scene mirrored reality. Filming took 4 grueling days, with both men, well into their 50s, insisting on doing their own stunts. They smashed each other into walls, shattered glass, and wrecked set pieces in take after take. Crew members worried someone would get seriously hurt, but neither actor would back down. Each wanted to prove he could endure more, push harder, and outlast the other. What was supposed to be make-believe quickly felt like a test of dominance. Behind the camera, things were even worse. Cruise was not just the star, he had extraordinary control over the production. His contract gave him final say on everything from script changes to editing decisions. At one point, he even brought in his own writers to reshape the story, shifting focus heavily onto his character. To some, it looked less like The Mummy and more like another installment of Mission Impossible. Crowe, who valued character depth and narrative balance, was furious. He believed the film was losing its heart, becoming nothing more than a vanity project for Cruise. The clash in styles became impossible to ignore. Cruise thrived on speed, spectacle, and relentless control. Crowe thrived on intensity, emotional depth, and collaborative storytelling. For the crew, it was like watching two titans wrestle, not just on set, but over the very soul of the movie. Some quietly sided with Cruise, trusting his proven blockbuster formula. Others gravitated toward Crowe, who demanded respect for character and craft. The set became divided, with arguments breaking out so often that crew members reportedly began documenting them. When the dust settled, the results spoke for themselves. The Mummy underperformed at the box office and was savaged by critics, effectively killing Universal's planned monster universe before it even began. For Cruise, it was a rare misfire in a career built on near-perfect box office instincts. For Crowe, it was proof that Cruise's obsession with control could ruin even the most promising projects. And for Hollywood insiders, it confirmed what many had suspected all along. The simmering tension between these two stars was not just gossip. It was real, it was messy, and it left scars that would last long after the cameras stopped rolling. Tom Cruise's clash with Russell Crowe was not an isolated case. It was part of a long history of conflicts that revealed just how polarizing he could be. For decades, Cruise balanced superstardom with controversy, often finding himself at the center of very public feuds that exposed a side of him fans were not used to seeing. One of the most infamous came in 2005, when actress Brooke Shields released her memoir Down Came the Rain, detailing her struggles with postpartum depression. Shields bravely shared how antidepressants helped her recover. But instead of showing empathy, Crowe launched into a very public attack, calling her decision irresponsible. During a live interview, he dismissed antidepressants entirely, claiming they did not work, and suggested that vitamins and exercise were the only answers. His remarks triggered outrage, especially from women who had faced similar struggles, and painted Crowe as out of touch with real human suffering. Shields clapped back in a New York Times op-ed, telling Crowe to stick to saving the world from aliens and leave medical advice to professionals. The controversy did not end there. Weeks later, Crowe sat down for an interview with Matt Lauer on The Today Show. What started as a promotional chat for War of the Worlds turned into a heated argument. Lauer pressed him about his attacks on Shields, and Crowe doubled down, declaring psychiatry a pseudoscience and insisting there was no such thing as a chemical imbalance. At one point, he scolded Lauer directly. "You do not know the history of psychiatry. I do." The moment was tense, awkward, and unforgettable, an explosive clash broadcast live on national television. It left a lasting mark on Crowe's reputation, reinforcing his image as someone fiercely committed to his beliefs, even at the cost of public opinion. And it was not just interviews where Crowe rubbed co-stars the wrong way. Actress Thandie Newton opened up years later about her time filming Mission Impossible 2. What was supposed to be a simple balcony argument scene turned into a nightmare. The director John Woo barely spoke English, leaving the actors to figure things out on their own. Crowe, frustrated with Newton's performance, suggested they swap roles. She would play his character, and he would play hers. The bizarre exercise left Newton humiliated and terrified, convinced she was failing. She later admitted it was one of the worst experiences of her career, and she never worked with him again. Even veteran actors were not afraid to criticize Crowe. In 2022, Mickey Rourke appeared on Piers Morgan Uncensored and dismissed Cruise's billion-dollar success with Top Gun Maverick as meaningless. Rourke called him irrelevant, arguing that real actors take risks and transform themselves, while Cruise had been playing the same type of role for 35 years. It was a brutal takedown, and though fans disagreed, it highlighted how divisive Cruise had become within the acting community. These clashes showed a consistent pattern. For all his charm and talent, Cruise's relentless pursuit of control and conviction often came at the expense of relationships. And while some stars simply walked away, others began speaking out about a darker influence behind his behavior, an influence that would tie back to Scientology. If Tom Cruise's feuds with co-stars and interviewers raised eyebrows, his ties to Scientology raised far bigger questions. For years, Cruise has been the church's most famous member, publicly defending it, even as critics accused it of manipulation and abuse. To many, his connection explained not only his clashes in Hollywood, but also the way he wielded power behind the scenes. And as former Scientologists began to speak out, the picture they painted of Cruise was not the charming, smiling superstar audiences thought they knew. One of the loudest voices was actress Leah Remini, once a devoted Scientologist herself. After leaving the church, she began revealing troubling details about Cruise's behavior. In 2020, when a leaked recording of Cruise yelling at crew members on a Mission Impossible set went viral, fans praised him for demanding strict COVID safety protocols. But Remini claimed it was all for show. According to her, Scientologists did not even take the pandemic seriously, and Cruise's outburst was carefully staged to make him look heroic. She described him as an abusive dictator, shaped by Scientology leader David Miscavige, and suggested his public image was carefully manufactured to hide the darker side of his personality. And Cruise was not just the face of Scientology, he was its favorite son. Inside the church, he reportedly received privileges no one else did: gifts, personal staff, and even direct access to Miscavige himself. This created resentment among other celebrity members, none more so than John Travolta. For decades, Travolta had been Scientology's top Hollywood figure, loyal and dedicated. But when Cruise was awarded the church's highest honor, the Freedom Medal of Valor in 2008, it sparked a bitter rivalry. Travolta, who had long believed he was Scientology's most loyal star, was reportedly furious. He even skipped Cruise's wedding to Katie Holmes, a calculated snub that insiders took as a sign of his anger. The tension between the two actors ran deeper than simple jealousy. According to reports, Travolta felt sidelined, while Cruise was elevated to untouchable status. Miscavige allegedly saw Cruise as the perfect poster boy for Scientology's global image: handsome, powerful, and bankable. Travolta, despite his years of service, could not compete with Cruise's box office clout. The rivalry became one of Hollywood's strangest open secrets: two megastars, competing not just on screen, but within a controversial religion's hierarchy. For Russell Crowe, who had once described Cruise as laid back when discussing Scientology years earlier, this darker picture was unsettling. The cool, grounded man he met in Sydney seemed worlds apart from the figure described by Remini and others, and for the rest of Hollywood, it was clear: Cruise's connection to Scientology was not just a personal choice, it was a force that shaped his career, his friendships, and even his rivalries. But the most explosive impact was not with Travolta or Remini. It came in Cruise's personal relationships: marriages that collapsed, friendships that fractured, and one disturbing story about how Scientology allegedly controlled who he could love. For all of Tom Cruise's box office triumphs, his personal life often became just as much of a headline as his films. His marriage to Nicole Kidman had been Hollywood's fairy tale for a decade. Two megastars, seemingly unstoppable together. But when Cruise filed for divorce in 2001, Kidman was devastated. Reports at the time said she never saw it coming. In interviews years later, Kidman admitted the split left her broken. On the very night she won her Oscar for The Hours, she went home early from the Vanity Fair party, sat on the floor with her family, and ate takeout, too numb to celebrate what should have been the happiest moment of her career. The divorce was not just the end of a marriage, it was complicated by Scientology. Rumors suggested the church had labeled Kidman a suppressive person, making it difficult for her to stay close to the children she and Cruise had adopted. Cruise's next marriage to Katie Holmes ended just as explosively. In 2012, Holmes stunned the world by filing for divorce in New York and finalizing it in just 2 weeks, an unheard-of speed for a Hollywood couple of their stature. Holmes had reportedly plotted her exit with military precision, using disposable phones to secretly contact lawyers so Cruise would not find out. In the settlement, she walked away without spousal support, but secured full physical custody of their daughter Suri. Cruise agreed to pay nearly $500,000 a year in child support and cover Suri's expenses, but insiders noted Holmes's biggest win was shielding her daughter from Scientology's influence. For a star like Cruise, known for control, the speed and secrecy of Holmes's escape was seen as both shocking and humiliating. But perhaps the most disturbing story tied to Cruise's personal life came from actress Nazanin Boniadi. In late 2004, the Church of Scientology allegedly selected her for what was described as a special project. She was told to change her appearance, break up with her boyfriend, and prepare for something life-changing. What she did not know at first was that the project was Tom Cruise. According to Boniadi, she was flown to New York, placed under constant watch, and groomed to be Cruise's girlfriend. Every detail of her life was micromanaged, from how she dressed to how she behaved around him. When she slipped up, even using the wrong words in casual conversation, she was punished with grueling auditing sessions and humiliating chores. By January 2005, the relationship was abruptly over, and Boniadi said she was left heartbroken, confused, and punished by the church for speaking about it. Years later, she shared her story with the FBI, fueling even more controversy about Scientology's influence over Cruise's private life. For Hollywood insiders, these stories painted a troubling picture. Cruise was still the man who delivered billion-dollar blockbusters, but behind closed doors, his personal relationships seemed defined by secrecy, control, and the looming presence of Scientology. And for Russell Crowe, who had once admired him at a backyard barbecue, the man he saw unfolding in the headlines looked less like the grounded star he had met, and more like someone trapped in a world very few outsiders could ever understand. Tom Cruise and Russell Crowe were never meant to be enemies. Their first meeting was built on respect, curiosity, and the belief that they might one day collaborate as equals. But Hollywood rarely allows two dominant personalities to coexist peacefully, especially when both demand control. What began as admiration shifted into rivalry, sparked by personal loyalties, fueled by creative clashes, and ultimately immortalized in a film that collapsed under the weight of their differences. The Mummy was not just a failed blockbuster, It became the symbol of two men who could never truly meet in the middle. For Cruise, the story does not end with Crowe. His career remains one of the most extraordinary in Hollywood history. Decades of box office dominance, iconic franchises, and jaw-dropping stunts that no other star dares to attempt. Yet behind the spectacle, there is a shadow. A long list of feuds, controversies, and deeply personal stories that reveal a far more complicated man. From public arguments with Brooke Shields and Matt Lauer, to disturbing allegations of Scientology's control over his relationships, Cruise has lived under a microscope like few others. For his fans, he is still the ultimate movie star. For his critics, he is a reminder of how power in Hollywood can blur the line between genius and obsession. Russell Crowe's legacy is different, but equally enduring. Where Cruise became a global brand, Crowe became a symbol of craft. His performances in Gladiator, The Insider, and A Beautiful Mind remain benchmarks for intensity and transformation. And while his clashes with Cruise revealed the limits of their friendship, they also highlighted the kind of actor Crowe chose to be, one who values authenticity over control, storytelling over spectacle. For audiences, the contrast between the two men has become part of their mythology. In the end, their relationship tells us something larger about Hollywood itself. Behind every red carpet smile, there are alliances, rivalries, and private tensions that shape careers in ways fans never see. Cruise may forever be remembered as the daredevil who risked everything for the shot, while Crowe may be remembered as the warrior who carried entire films on his shoulders. But together, their story is one of admiration turned to rivalry, respect turned to bitterness, and a reminder that even the biggest stars are still human, flawed, conflicted, and caught in battles the world was never supposed to see. And as Russell Crowe once said, when reflecting on his time with Cruise, any ending to a relationship like that is heavy, man. Heavy indeed, and one that still leaves fans wondering. In Hollywood, where power and loyalty are everything, was this just a clash of egos, or was it something far deeper that the world will never fully know?